years of austerity. Around 750,000 new homes were needed in England and Wales alone in 1945, simply to house the existing population. Food shortages became so severe that the new Labour government, which came to power in the summer of 1945, had to introduce temporary bread rationing and potato controls. The wartime restrictions on many goods remained in force for years. Petrol rationing only came to an end in 1950, while controls on meat and bacon would continue for 4 years after that. Britain was poor, and with an average daily intake of only 2,700 calories, it was hungry. There was a boom in the sale of bathroom scales, and at the Open Golf Championships at St Andrews in 1946, England's Henry Cotton blamed his poor performance on a lack of stamina caused by food rationing. But whereas during the war an all-in-it-together attitude had prevailed, on the surface at least, the peace brought a renewal of class conflict, and faced with a future that didn't want them and a past that cost too much, country house owners grappled with difficult choices. To sell off a few farms, or that dusty little medieval book of hours in the library that no one has opened for centuries, or the Reynolds of great-great-grandmother hanging on the stairs. To shut up the house for a while, move to somewhere more manageable on the edge of the estate, and hope things would improve, or to give up an ancestral seat which had been in the family for generations and bring in the demolition contractors to salvage what they could from a white elephant that no one wanted. In other words, to stay or to go. Nevertheless, alongside this narrative of destruction and despair, the death duties, the dispersal of collections, and the demolition of country houses, there runs another more complex story. And it is this alternative narrative that Noble Ambitions tries to unravel. Some great and less great houses were abandoned by their owners, yes, but most were not. Some were demolished, yes, although, again, most were not. Some became schools or institutions or National Trust showplaces. Most did not. They remained homes. For every impoverished country squire watching in horror as the taxman chipped away at the foundations of his or her ancestral seat, there was another who managed to carry on, writing angry letters to the Times about financial ruin, and then ringing for his butler to take them to the post. And when country houses did come on the market, as they did in increasing numbers, there were new people ready to step in and buy themselves a piece of the past, ready to take their place in the community, and able to compensate for the lack of a fat entry in debrettes with a fat bank balance. The English country house, like its comrades in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, which put in occasional appearances in these pages, is a remarkably resilient beast. Predictions of its death came thick and fast in the 29 years between the end of the war and the famous and enormously influential 1974 exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which both proclaimed its destruction and ensured its survival, and which ends my story, for the time being at least. Yet even when the demolitions were at their height in the dark days of the 1950s, dozens of new country houses were going up. Old ones were being reinvented, and old families continued to live in them. When new families took over old houses, they loved and cherished them every bit as much as their predecessors had. Life in the country house in the 1950s and 1960s was complicated. It was uncertain at times, but it was dynamic, exciting, and in spite of protestations to the contrary, it made an important contribution to British culture. Noble Ambitions is my attempt to reconstruct and understand a way of life that was sometimes comic, sometimes fraught with anxiety and self-doubt, sometimes outrageous and glamorous. I have tried to understand a forgotten moment in the history of the English country house, a curiously intimate collaboration between members of the crumbling old order and of the rising new, as a rakish, raffish, yet aristocratic